I'm Emily Pennington. I'm a former journalist, and now I head up Park Street University, which is the education division within Park Street. Okay, now let's talk about business models. Park Street's worked with thousands of brands all over the world, and we've seen every variation of business models, both good and bad. I'm going to cover a few of the newer ones that we have seen lately that are gaining traction. Before I do that, let's talk on what the sort of standard business models that we've seen throughout, let's say the 90s to the 2010s, some of the most common were. So international drinks companies, you all know those, the Diageo's, the Pernod Ricard, you're familiar with them. Then there's the traditional importing model. So under this type of model, let's say you're a foreign producer and you have a small spirit or wine brand that you want to bring to the US. Well, with the traditional importing model, to make your brand available here, you would sign a contract or an agreement with an importer who would then assume the responsibility of, marketing, selling, working with a distributor on your behalf. And sometimes they did a great job and sometimes they didn't. But either way, you were probably locked in with them for a while. Then you have craft distilleries. This is sort of the third wave here of business models that we saw coming through around the 2010s, started to popularize. And when the craft category first became popular, what you tended to see was locally owned facilities where the distillers made on-site, by hand, the hard way, the longest way possible. And they sold to a local, maybe regional audience if they were lucky. And then they probably sourced their materials somewhat domestically. So now we still have all three of these business models. They're all still very, viable business model, but there's a couple of different ones that we're seeing become normalized. The first one I'm going to talk about is non-distiller producers. So when craft spirits first caught on in the US, having your product contract produced was kind of a dirty secret, right? You didn't want to talk about it. You didn't really want to put it on your label. And God forbid, if you lied about it and you got caught, you were going to be exposed and shamed for it. But times have changed. Contract producing is a lot more commonplace. And I think both the consumers and the industry at large have kind of relaxed about this a little bit. So at Park Street, we see a significant number of startup spirits brands that come to us that have no facility of their own. And the primary benefit of this is that it lowers the amount of capital you need to get started. And it also, in some cases, it allows you to scale faster, right? Without the constraints of your physical facility. So we've even seen startup distilleries that from the very beginning, they build in excess capacity into their startup plan so that they can contract distill for other craft brands. So it's become pretty normalized. The next one is independent bottlers. Independent bottlers is a business model that have been fairly common in Scotland for decades, but are sort of quietly growing in the US. And typically an independent bottler would purchase barrels from an existing distillery, and they would develop some sort of small batch release that would highlight said distillery. Maybe it's, the way it was produced or what goes into the bottling. Maybe they blend it together. But either way, the result is kind of the same as where the finished product is as much about the company that made it as the one that bottled it. And there's even enough of them to have, an alliance. AmericanIndie.com exists. And I think Lost Lantern is a really good example of this model. And then looking at the last one here, we have self-pitch distribution. So this is what our CEO likes to describe the model for brand building for suppliers who use Park Street services. We operate as a distributor in certain markets, which means you have all of the benefits of a traditional distribution partner. So you get the warehousing, the delivery, the back office. You just don't get the sales and marketing aspect of it. So what does this mean for your business strategy? The barriers to entry are lower than ever before to starting a business in the alcohol industry. Now, don't mistake that for being easy to build a brand. Those are two very different things. It's much easier to get one started than it is to build it. However, with the ease of access to the market, the bar is higher to stand out in a crowd and succeed. Starting with a good quality product, a liquid, that used to give you an edge. But at this point, it's just table stakes, right? Like don't even come to anyone if you don't have a good product. And additionally, proof of concept is what distributors and retailer partners are looking for now, and they require. Okay, you have a great product, you have a solid brand. Now they need you to prove that you can get repeat purchases at the retail and the consumer level. That's what they're looking for. They're not going to build your brand for you. And this is kind of where the self-pitch distribution model comes in. The benefit for new to world brands is they can work with a clearing distributor like Park Street. They can build velocity. They can build sort of a name for themselves before they sort of graduate onto those like traditional models with distributors. And then lastly, in a crowded marketplace, you're likely going to need marketing and sales support if your aim is to grow into a regional or nationwide brand in the US. There are plenty. I mean, look, there's still merit to if you just want to have a local, statewide brand, you can do that. That's great. But if you want to build beyond your state into a region or a business, you need that sales support. You can no longer really bootstrap your way to a Tito's level brand anymore. All right, I'm going to transition here into changes in channel strategy. There's an old adage in the US that alcohol brands are built on premise. You've probably all heard it. Historically, this has been largely true because bars and restaurants have served as the primary location where consumers could try new products without as much overhead, right? You could try a $10 or $15 cocktail margarita if that's what you're into, rather than spending $40 or $50 at the retail store. In those days, most social drinking occurred outside of the home. On-premise allowed the brands to sort of transfer the cachet from whatever bar or establishment onto their brands, right? And they create like a association or an experience that has kind of linked those two together. But today, now to be clear, on-premise is still valuable. You can still build brands there, but it's just different. Discovery of new product isn't just happening on-premise anymore. So what's changed? Certainly, the movement towards premiumization has made a difference. So premiumization, Matt touched on this, where consumers want better products and they're drinking less. So they're spending more and they're drinking less, which means they're also willing to shell out a little bit more for a whole bottle trial. I would argue that they feel comfortable doing this because they've already probably had the ability to vet the product online, whether that's through social media or various rating websites, and their understanding of the category is just better. There are resources out there for them, so they can be relatively sure that if they are investing in a $40 or $50 bottle, they feel comfortable that they know it's going to be pretty good. And then the trend toward drinking at home occasions has significantly increased post-COVID. The get-togethers and the newly acquired bartending skills that were required during that time are still sort of lingering, and they're still putting them to good use. So for the on-premise, there is still new trial happening, but I think it's more common for a customer to come to a bar and already know what they want. As opposed to, coming in with a blank slate and being sold something. So as a result of these shifts in consumer behavior, most experts will suggest more of an omni-channel approach to building a brand. So yes, brands are built in the off-premise, but they can also be built in the off-premise and the e-commerce, and maybe even a little non-premise like festivals and concerts. Okay, this is just such a good case study of a brand that was built in a non-traditional on-premise way. The woman who founded it, she did not come with industry experience. She was a teacher, and she got a $178,000 loan, and she built this business from scratch over the last 15 years. So she didn't have a leg up. She started on her own, and she focused on independent, C-stores and off-premise grocery stores to build this brand. From 2019 to 2022, it grew 292%. And today, it's something like the number one RTD brand for Gen Z. It's worth an estimated $1 billion. It's sold in 50 states and 27 countries. So if you are building a brand and you're looking for the right route to market and you're not sure if it's on premise, I love this brand as a case study because they did it on their own with no experience and they sort of bucked the tradition of building on premise.